So we'll just pick up with, you were speaking about advocacy journalism, specifically with this issue on immigration.
Right, yeah. Well, to add a little bit to the Pete Wilson situation, I think one of the things that bothered Pete Wilson so much when we interviewed him was the fact that we had asked people on the street they really felt that he was against them. So we said, what would you do? What would you ask him if you had him in front of you? So we taped several questions from the Hispanic community to Pete Wilson. And politicians weren't used to that. They weren't used to taking questions from people. Now in the era of social media where you get questions from Facebook and Twitter is different. Now they know that they have to have a more direct contact with people. But at the time, they weren't used to that. So I think he was very shocked by the fact that we put someone up and say, Mr. Pete Wilson, why do you hate us? Or Mr. Pete Wilson, what do you have against our community? So that's one of the reasons I think that really upset him. And part of our coverage there, I think, is what began to earn us his reputation of doing advocacy journalism. And from then on, I think that because that was the beginning of the really bad time, the image of the community goes in cycles, up and down, up and down. That was one of those down times where not only undocumented immigrants, but immigrants were accused of all the ills of this country. And I think that's one of the reasons why we decided that we need to speak up for them. Not that we need to advocate for an open border policy, but we need to give them a voice. We need to be those, give them the information that they need so we can empower them. I don't think it's a matter of speaking for them or advocating for them, but empowering them with the information that they need and asking the questions that they need answered. If they can't ask the questions, then we need to ask those questions for them. So, when we are accused of advocacy journalism, what I always say is that, we're basically contributing to a debate in this country. Otherwise, it's a monologue accusing immigrants for all the ills of this country. And some might argue that, no, it's not all immigrants, it's only undocumented immigrants. Well, there's a very fine line between undocumented immigrants and immigrants because just about the whole community feels somehow affected by this because of the very negative rhetoric that surrounds the immigration issue and that has escalated throughout the last 20 years, more so in the last 10 years. I think ever since 9/11, the image of immigrants has been very negative in mainstream and in politics. So what we do is that we contribute to a debate. If you in mainstream media and on radio talk shows and with politicians hear all the horrible things that immigrants are bringing to this country, according to them, well, I think it's our duty to show not only how immigrants are contributing to this country, but some of their human stories. Because, they're human beings and everyone has a reason, everyone has a story of how they became undocumented in this country or why they came to this country undocumented or why they came and stayed. So those are the types of stories that I think is important for us to share. We need to explain to our audience and to a larger audience that immigrants are here to contribute, that they're here in search of a better life for them, for their families, but they also want to be part of society. And I think that's why we give them a voice and that's why we advocate for them.
Mm-hmm. And I want to talk about Univision's role in the presidential debates because it didn't always have a seat at the table at those. So in 2007, you were one of the hosts of the first ever Democratic and Republican presidential candidate forums in Spanish. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that experience and how it maybe impacted?
Right.
Or didn't
we actually did one before that in a co-production with PBS, and we did it in Arizona, and it was only Democrats at the time, and I think they began to realize the importance of Spanish language media. When I started working at KMX and covered politics, it wasn't easy, especially when I began to cover politics nationally with national elections. I remember trying to get an interview and they would say, who? Where are you from? Channel 30 what? And, well, maybe we can find a translator. I said, no, I can do the interview in English. I would just like the opportunity. We could translate it ourselves. And we would have to give so much explanation as to why we deserve to give them, to be interviewed. I'm sorry, let me say that again. Okay, we can take that part. I think we thought it was insulting for us to have to explain who we were and why they should be interviewed by us, why they should give us an interview, why our community needed to hear from them. hear their different positions so that they could make an educated decision when it came time to go to the polls. But that has changed tremendously. It has changed because I think we've grown hand in hand. The Hispanic community has grown with Spanish language media, especially Univision. We've grown hand in hand, and I think we've played a pretty important role in that. Not only because we provide the information for them in their language, but we talk about the issues that affect them. We question politicians on the issues that most affect Hispanic community. So now I think you see such a major change that not only are the doors of the White House open to us, but they call us and offer us interviews. Every major campaign will have someone on their staff that deals with Spanish language media or that deals with Hispanic issues. And that just goes to show the importance of the Hispanic community and the Spanish language media to reach that Hispanic community.
Do you think that your presence at the presidential debates impacted the vote, say in 2007?
I think so, because I think we allowed our audience to hear the candidates directly, to go beyond the headlines, to go beyond the sound bites, and actually discuss issues that they probably would never discuss on mainstream media. You know, I seriously doubt that anything you see on ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, any other, Fox, you would not hear them talking about the importance of education for the Hispanic community and the high school dropout rate, about the dreamers, about all these thousands of young people who are here undocumented, who want an opportunity to work, about the separation of families. You know, they just don't ask those types of questions. And those are the kinds of viewpoints that our audience needs to make up their mind. And it's not only immigration, it's education and it's health and it's, the economy. But they need to understand how, for example, the jobless rate among Hispanics is higher than that of the general market, how the educational college attainment is lower among Hispanics than the general population here. So those are issues that, if we're not asked by us at Univision, would probably never be discussed in mainstream media.
I want to talk a bit about your interview preparation and style when you interview a world leader, because as many interviews as you've done and as long as you've been on the air, the first time you interview a president of the United States or one of the dictators that you interview, or world leaders, how do you prepare yourself for being able to be fair and also press them?
I don't know if I can just add one more thing before that to what we said before, because I think it's very important just to interject this. I think when we do interviews, and it goes to this question too, when we do interviews with heads of state, let's say in the U.S., or we moderate a debate with politicians in the U.S., it forces them, at least for the time it takes to prepare for that particular debate, to think about the Hispanic community, to think about the issues and prepare the issues and read up on the issues that affect the Hispanic community. So we're not only doing a service to our community by giving them the information, but we are sort of pushing these politicians to think about this very important electorate and about the issues that concern them. So I think the same thing when we prepare for interviews. As you know, just like any other journalist, they ask us for questions and we never give them the questions. We just give them the topics, which I think is very important. So when you prepare for interviews like this, I'm of the school of thought that the questions are important, but the answers are even more important. Because if you ask tough questions and you don't get an answer, what have you accomplished other than the fact that you're showing people that you're a tough interviewer? I think you need to get the answer in order to really serve your community and your viewers or your readers or your listeners, you need to get answers. Whatever it takes to get answers, but you need to get the answer. So to me, the question's important, and I always think of the questions that people want to know. I'm here on their behalf, on the viewers' behalf. I'm representing them, and I need to ask the questions that they want asked. But as we all know, politicians will answer whatever they want to answer. So most of their answers are predictable. So when I prepare a question, I always think of the answer. And to me, the most important is the follow-up, not the question itself. or to pose the question in a way where I already know what you're going to tell me, so tell me what I don't know, tell me something I don't know, tell me something behind this. I think you always have to be prepared to listen to their answers and do follow-ups and not let them get away with saying whatever they want to say. You know, I think that's important. But at the same time, you know, you don't want an interview to become an interrogation or an interview to become a debate between you and the person you're interviewing. So I think the flow of information is important, especially when it's a world leader. You know, world leaders are usually not in touch with what's happening with the people that affect their decisions. And you need to bring it home to them. You need to bring them to that level. And you have to understand that they're doing their job and you're doing your job. And at the moment that you're doing that interview, you know, you respect their position, but they need to respect your position too. So the level changes, I think. There is that respect, but you're in an equal level at that time. You need to respect the position and the job that they have, but they need to respect your position too.
Is there a particular instance you could think of where that happened, where you were speaking with someone and alerted them to the fact that they were not in touch and that the perception was different?
Yeah, I mean, it's happened many times. I don't know that I can mention any specific one, but I've had an opportunity to interview many world leaders in the U.S., every president since Jimmy Carter, in Latin America, especially in the 80s and the 90s, we interviewed several leaders. Recently, I did a special on the children at the border crisis, and I went to Central America. I went to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and the border. And we did, we wanted to show the conditions that these kids live in and what makes them want to leave their country in search of a better life. It's not necessarily so that they want to come here and reunite with their families who are here undocumented and are bringing their kids over. In some cases, these people are running away from poverty, from gang violence, from violence generated by the drug wars. So I did have an opportunity to interview not only people in different communities, poor communities. I interviewed gang members and I interviewed human traffickers, but I interviewed two of the presidents there. And I took the pictures, I took the video, and I went to show them. And I did press them on the fact that these are the conditions that these people live in. And they seem to blame the U.S. For the drug consumption. They all blame the U.S. Well, there's drug consumption in the U.S., so the U.S. it's their fault and their responsibility to take care of us, because we wouldn't have this drug violence in our country if it wasn't because they're a consumer country. Well, you know, you have a responsibility to your own people. If your people are living in poverty and they feel that they need to leave, if there's no safety, the safety in this country is not the responsibility of the U.S., it's the responsibility of this government. People need to feel safe. People need to feel like they have opportunities, that they can attain the education and opportunities to get ahead in life, that they shouldn't have to leave. And I think when you do those types of interviews, they're the questions important, but the answer's important too, here again. So that's happened to me in the most recent case, was the case of these Central American presidents. And also the presidents of Mexico. I remember interviewing President Calderon at one point, where again he was advocating for the rights of Mexicans in the U.S., and I asked him if he had the moral authority to ask the U.S. to treat his compatriots in a compassionate way when Mexico does not treat immigrants from other countries, especially Central America, in a compassionate way. So, you know, he believes he does have the moral authority to do so, but at the time I didn't. So, you know, I think you need to be able to ask those types of questions. But again, at least in my style, I always try to do it in a very respectful manner, asking the tough questions in a respectful manner, because I need answers. And the most important thing is having the follow-up question.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you ever caught anyone very off guard or had a question that really threw them?
I think so. I think it was the president of Guatemala many years ago during an election. It was Vinicio Cerezo, and his country had been accused of impunity with, you know, there was a horrible war that killed 250,000 people that were either killed or disappeared, and there was a peace process and nothing was done. There was so much impunity in that country that he felt that it wasn't his responsibility, that it wasn't his fault. So I took with me, and I remember I had kept these for years. I had a big stack of research that I did for that, studies from Harvard, studies, special reports from Congress, special reports from Amnesty International, from different universities. And I had all that information. I said, there's reports that accuse your government of doing this. He says, who accuses me? I said, well, they accuse your government. Don't you represent your government? And he was very upset. And did get up and leave. That's one of the ones that has gotten up and left. They don't like to be questioned, especially in Latin America, because I think that they're used to a different type of journalism. They're used to journalists who are either censored or self-censored, who have very close ties with their government, whose media outlet has close ties to the government, and they don't dare. They're afraid of authority. It's very different than in the U.S. I think in the U.S. sometimes we go overboard and maybe we get a little bit too close to to the questions and feel that we can ask them anything, whether personal or not. But in Latin America, there's a certain distance between a journalist and a head of state. I think when we come from the U.S., even though we're doing it in Spanish, when we come from the U.S., we come with that culture of saying, we are journalists and we can ask you anything in a respectful manner, but you need to, answer to your constituency. So, but in Mexico, they're not used to that type of thing. In Mexico and in several other Latin American countries. So, yes, it's happened to me many times. It's happened to me in Colombia with President Uribe. It's happened to me in Mexico. It's happened to me with several presidents. But like I say, if you don't have the facts, you can't accuse anyone of anything. So you have to really prepare well. If you're going to ask a question, you have to know the answer to the question. You have to.
What makes a good interview?
I think a good question makes a good interview. An interesting subject makes a good interview. Follow-up questions make a good interview. And topics that are, out of the ordinary. There's people that are just boring to interview, and you can't allow them to just ramble on and on and on and on. You have to know when to interrupt them and when to do the follow-up and when to put it into perspective so that it's informative. An interview can be entertaining or it could be informative. If you can do both, then I think that you're pretty good as a journalist.
What would you say is the most difficult interview that you have done?
Probably one of the most difficult interviews that I have done. One of the hardest to get was Subcomandante Marcos. That was an ordeal. But one of the difficult ones to do was with Pinochet. And I say that because he did very few interviews with international media during the 16 years that he was a dictator. And we were one of the last ones to do that. And when we did the interview, I think he believed that there was a connection there with his agenda for some reason or another. Maybe because I was coming from Miami and he felt that Miami was a very conservative city, or maybe because at the time the president of the company was from Chile. But I think he expected a type of interview that was going to be very pro-Pinochet. So when I started asking him about the disappearances and the violations of human rights, he became very defensive. And there really were not very many good answers from Pinochet. So if I can ask as many good questions as I want, or strong questions, but if I don't get answers, then the interview is boring. Then I didn't get anything done. So I think it was very difficult because his answers were short and curt and facetious, and I didn't really get much out of Pinochet. He became very, very defensive. So the important thing with that interview is that I can say I interviewed Pinochet. So what does that do? It helps my resume, but does that really help people?
Well, what would you say then is the most important interview of your career to date?
Wow, I think there have been a lot of very important interviews, and I would say some of my interviews with President Obama, and I've had an opportunity to interview him several times. I think they've been of substance because out of all of the politicians that I've interviewed, I feel that President Obama is one of the few that actually answers your question, even if he then goes off to his own, his own prepared remarks. At least he listens to your question and answers it. You don't always like the answer, so you have to follow up on that. But I think he's making, such a big impact in history. Like him or hate him, he's still making a big impact. And I think he is present at a transitional time in this country and in society and in the world. So there have been a lot of the interviews that I've done with him that I think are important and make an impact to our community.
You have been called the most recognized and trusted Hispanic newswoman in America.
That's an honor.
What do you consider your biggest responsibility in that role?
I think that you need to keep things into perspective, and you need to understand why you're here. And I'm not here to be a TV star. I'm here to be representative of our people. I'm here to communicate. I'm here to empower our audience. I think that mission that I set myself out to follow back in the early 80s when I started working at KMEX is one that I want to follow all the way through. And if people watch me and people listen to me and people believe me, it's because I think that they have seen that commitment. They've seen me go out on the street and not just sit and read news, not be a news reader, but actually, cover the stories and tell the stories that need to be told. Stories that are going to make a difference in people's lives, stories that need to be told. And I think that's how you gain their trust. I don't think that you can fake it. That's not something. The lens doesn't lie. You can't pretend to be one thing and really be another when it comes to television. And I think some of our colleagues have learned that, some of them the hard way. But you need to earn the trust of the people that are watching you. And if I have earned that reputation, I think it's because I have shown that commitment to them. I have shown that informing them and empowering them is more important to me than myself and my career.
Mm. Have there been specific challenges being a female anchor, do you think, in your career?
Along the way there have. Mm-hmm. I think that even though, women, we have advanced in many ways in journalism, we're still lagging behind. And, women, I think, still have to work twice as hard to receive half of the recognition that men do. That is definitely something that is still happening. And maybe as a Hispanic woman, I have to work 3 times as hard to get 1/3 of the recognition that men do. But the good news is that we have that ability to multitask. And we have that ability to be compassionate. And we have that ability to have that sense that some stories require to bring it home to people. Mm. So yeah, there have been challenges. There have been challenges within my newsroom. There have been challenges while covering a story. I mean, there's been times when I haven't been sent to the Middle East because I'm a woman. And there have been times when I have gotten an interview because I'm a woman. So, it has been an issue. But I think that I go back to my childhood and what I learned from my mother, that work ethic and that those goals, those life lessons of not allowing myself to be mediocre and not allowing myself to be a conformist, that have helped me to say, okay, so if I'm being discriminated against, whether it's overtly or not, I'm going to step up to the challenge and I'm going to raise my hand and say I'm here and I can do the job just as well as a man can, and then show it by your work. Because I don't want to say I'm not a feminist. I am a feminist, but not in the sense where you bring up your flag and constantly complain about discrimination. Because I think that the way to combat that is to actually do the work and show through your work and through your actions that you are a human being and capable of doing a job. And it is such a privilege to do the job that we are doing right now and that I am doing. I mean, I can't think of anything better that I'd like to do with my life than to be a communicator in this country and to feel that somehow my work has contributed to the growth of the Hispanic community, the empowerment of the Hispanic community, and the understanding in society of who we are, what we represent here, and how I can bridge that gap between us and them, and eventually we'll just all be us.
What do you see as the changes? There's so many changes have happened. Do you think that television today represents the diversity in this country? And where do you see that going in the future?
I think television is beginning to show that diversity. We see more and more Hispanics on the air, maybe not a representative of our community. There's not enough of them out there. But little by little they're being recognized, not only to cover Hispanic issues, but to cover any issues. But I do think that there's still a long way to go. You know, one thing that to me is a positive sign is that for many years, we at Univision and maybe Telemundo and some of the other Hispanic media outlets were the only ones that ever talked about the Hispanic vote, that ever polled Hispanics. And now it feels so good to see mainstream media also focus on the Hispanic vote and also ask questions, also even mention the word Hispanic vote in their interviews or in their polling. I don't think that they have gotten to the point where they're giving us the importance that we really deserve, but just the mere mention of the Hispanic vote in mainstream media is so important, so impactful, that it just makes me feel like all this work that we've done, you know, all these years has paid off.
We're going to take a few minutes just to sum up a little bit here because Jorge's coming soon. Would you say that you had any mentors or anyone imparted any advice to you that was very impactful in your career?
I think probably it was my parents and people along the way. You know, there's certain things along the way in your life, that life lessons that you learn and phrases that stay with you that somehow come back all the time and put you into focus and help put you into perspective. I think you need to keep that, especially when you work as a network anchor, when you're covering the world, when you're recognized by millions of people. You need to put that perspective. So I think some of the lessons that I've learned from many of my news directors, Pete Moraga is one of them, also Guillermo Martinez, another one. You know, they have said things to me that stay with me and that keep me focused and that keep me grounded. And that's what helps me to do a good job, and that's what helps me to remember why I'm here. You know, I'm not here for myself. I'm here for an audience that really, really needs us, that really needs for me or anyone else in my position or my colleagues to be there for them. So I think it's those life lessons, those lines, those phrases that keep me grounded, that have impacted my career. But without a doubt, I think, and I've mentioned it many times before, but I think understanding that you can't allow yourself to be mediocre and that you can't be a conformist. And if you apply not being a conformist to just about everything that you do, whether you do an interview, whether you do a story, or whatever it is, step up to that challenge. You know, one of I think the fascinating things about our career is that there's always something new. And my father told me, because he was always studying, and I used to say, why are you always studying? He says, you never stop learning. Now I know it's because he had been a priest and he was always reading. So he says, you never, ever stop learning. You always learn something new. You always grow. By thinking that there's always room for growth, I never feel like I've made it. You know, the moment that you make it, it means that you only have two choices. Either start going down or hold on for dear life so that you don't fall. So there's always room for growth. There's always a new story to cover. There's always a new interview to do. There's always a new technology to conquer. And there's a lot of them now. There's a lot of them now to conquer. So, you know, the world's the limit. The sky's the limit.
You've received many awards in your career, most recently the Peabody. Congratulations. Oh, you need to clip?